Hashtag intro asterisk. What if the one person meant to protect you was the one you feared the most? The bruises on Amina's skin told a story no child should ever have to live. Her stepfather, Greg, showered her with gifts in public, but behind closed doors his kindness vanished, replaced by cold threats and cruel whispers. "You are nothing without me," he snarled, his voice sharp as a blade. But Amina was not nothing, and when she finally stood in court, her trembling voice held a truth powerful enough to shatter his lies forever. Before we get into this unforgettable story, make sure you are subscribed to Epic Story Moments. Do not forget to hit that bell so you never miss another amazing tale. If you enjoy the story, like, share, and leave a comment. It helps us bring more heartwarming stories your way. And we would love to know, where are you watching from? Let us stay connected. Amina sat cross-legged on the living room floor, her tiny fingers carefully arranging colored pencils in a perfect row. The air was sweet with the scent of cinnamon and vanilla, drifting in from the kitchen where her mother, Layla, hummed an old R&B tune. Saturday mornings were sacred. Pancakes drizzled with syrup, fresh fruit on the side, and laughter filling every corner of their home. Layla would twirl around the kitchen, a wooden spoon in her hand like a microphone, belting out melodies while Amina clapped along, giggling at her mother's playful dance moves. Their home was a sanctuary, warm, alive, and filled with love. Framed photographs of their happiest moments decorated the walls, each one a testament to the unbreakable bond between mother and daughter. On the bookshelf sat a collection of stories about powerful black women, warriors, pioneers, dreamers. Layla wanted Amina to grow up knowing she came from a lineage of strength. "Amina, come taste this batter. I think it's our best one yet," Layla called, her voice light and full of joy. Amina shot up from the floor, her braids bouncing as she ran to the kitchen. She dipped a small finger into the bowl, tasted the mixture, and scrunched her nose before breaking into a wide grin. "It's perfect, Mama." Layla leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "That is because it is made with love," she whispered, wiping a smudge of flour from Amina's cheek. Everything about that morning felt whole, safe, but it was the last time their world would ever feel that way. Monday morning arrived like any other, but the day had different plans. Layla kissed Amina goodbye at the school gate, promising to pick her up early for a trip to the park. Amina beamed, clutching the new coloring book her mother had surprised her with that morning. By lunchtime, the world as she knew it shattered. The principal entered the classroom, her face grave. She whispered something to the teacher, who immediately turned to Amina, her eyes soft and full of unspoken sorrow. "Amina, sweetheart, can you come with me?" Amina's heart pounded. She followed the principal down the hall, her small hands gripping the straps of her backpack. When they entered the office, she saw him, Greg. Her stepfather stood by the window, his sharp jaw clenched, his piercing blue eyes fixed on something outside. Hands shoved deep into his pockets, he did not turn when she walked in. He did not need to. She already felt the storm coming. The principal cleared her throat, her voice careful, measured. "Amina, there has been an accident." Amina's eyes darted to Greg. "Where is Mama?" Her voice trembled, her chest tightening. Greg finally looked at her. His face was unreadable, his tone devoid of emotion. "She is gone." The words did not make sense. "Gone where?" she whispered, shaking her head. "She's dead," he said flatly. "Car accident. That is it. You are coming home with me." The room spun. Amina stumbled back. No. This had to be a mistake. Mama was supposed to pick her up. She promised. But Greg did not comfort her. He just stood there, cold and distant, as if her mother's absence meant nothing at all. The drive home was silent. Amina sat curled in the back seat, hugging her backpack as tears streamed down her face. Greg did not speak. He did not turn on the radio. He did not even glance at her in the rearview mirror. When they pulled into the driveway, the house, once bright and welcoming, felt different. The curtains were drawn, the garden already beginning to wilt. Everything felt wrong. Inside, the air was heavy, cold. Greg tossed his keys onto the counter and turned to her. "Go to your room, but I—" His sharp glare stopped her mid-sentence. The edge in his voice made her flinch. Amina hurried down the hallway and shut her bedroom door behind her. She pressed her back against it, staring at the walls still decorated with colorful drawings and posters her mother had helped her hang. But the room no longer felt like hers. That night, she cried herself to sleep, clutching her teddy bear. Any moment now, Mama would walk through the door laughing, telling her this was all a big mistake. But no one came. The days blurred into each other. Greg barely spoke to her, and when he did, it was only to give orders or scold her over the smallest things. Leaving her shoes by the door, spilling a drop of juice on the counter. He stopped cooking for her. Instead, he left cans of soup or dry cereal on the table, as if she were an afterthought. Amina tried to hold on to her mother's memory. She drew pictures of her, wrote letters she could never send, whispered prayers at night, pleading for her to come back. But Greg made one thing clear. Any mention of Layla was forbidden. "She's dead," he snapped one evening when she timidly asked about her mother's favorite song. "Stop bringing her up." His tone was sharp, final, a warning. Amina swallowed her words and learned to keep her grief to herself. Slowly, the house grew darker. Greg removed all traces of Layla, her clothes, her books, the framed photographs that had lined the walls. It was as if he was trying to erase her entirely. Amina felt invisible, and she had no idea. The nightmare was only beginning. Amina avoided Greg as much as she could, spending most of her time locked in her room or sneaking outside when never possible. But even outside was no escape. At school, the whisper started. Ugly words, cruel words, the kind that stuck to her skin like burrs. One boy sneered at her hair. Another wrinkled his nose and muttered that she was dirty. "My dad says people like you do not belong," a classmate said, his voice laced with something Amina did not quite understand, but it made her stomach twist. She wanted to tell someone. She wanted to tell her grandmother, Evelyn. But Greg made sure she never got the chance. He rarely let her visit, and when Evelyn did stop by, he was polite but firm, brushing off her concerns with a tight-lipped smile. "You are spoiling her," he had said once when Evelyn arrived with a warm, homemade pie. "She needs to learn how to take care of herself." Amina had wanted to scream, wanted to tell her grandmother everything. The gnawing hunger, the loneliness, the way Greg looked at her like she was nothing more than a stain he could not scrub away. But fear held her tongue. Fear of what he might do. Fear of losing the last person who still cared. And so, Amina stayed silent. But deep down she knew this was only the beginning. Days blurred into weeks. The house grew darker. The warmth and laughter that once filled it were gone, replaced by suffocating silence. Greg's indifference slowly twisted into something cruel. At first, he barely acknowledged her existence, treating her like an unwanted guest in her own home. But soon, his hostility became deliberate. It was in the way his eyes lingered on her, sharp and cold. It was in the way his words dripped with venom. "You eat too much," he snapped one evening when she reached for a second slice of bread. "No wonder your kind always looks like beggars, greedy and lazy." Amina froze, her fingers tightening around the bread. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. Slowly, she set the slice down. Her appetite was already gone. Greg's insults became sharper, his patience thinner. He mocked her hair, calling it a tangled mess. "If you do not fix it, I will cut it all off," he growled one night, yanking the brush from her hands and hurling it across the room. When she tried to comb it the way her mother had taught her, his lips curled in disgust. "No one will take you seriously looking like that," he muttered. "You should be grateful I am even letting you stay here. People like you should know their place." The words burned, But what hurt more was the emptiness in his eyes. Amina learned to move carefully, to shrink herself. She tiptoed through the house, avoiding creaky floorboards. She spent hours in her room, the door locked, the lights off. But even then, she was not safe. You think hiding makes you invisible? Greg's voice sliced through the darkness one night. It does not. It just makes you pathetic. She did not answer. She only curled tighter in the corner of her closet, her arms wrapped around her knees. Greg stormed into her room, grabbed her by the arm, and yanked her to her feet. "Stop crying," he barked, his grip bruising. "You are not special, Amina. You are nothing." The tears stopped, not because she wanted them to, but because fear swallowed them whole. School was no better. The other kids noticed the way she carried herself. Shoulders hunched, head down, voice barely a whisper. "Why does your hair look like that?" a girl asked, tugging at one of her braids. "Do you even have a dad?" a boy sneered. Or did he leave like all the others? Their words echoed Greg's, and for the first time, Amina wondered if they were right. Teachers noticed a shift in her, the way she withdrew further each day. But no one pressed the issue. Greg made sure of that. At parent-teacher meetings, he smiled, shook hands, played the part of the grieving stepfather. "She has been acting out," he would say in a hushed, concerned tone. "You know how kids are, especially after a loss." No one questioned him. And at home, Greg covered his tracks well. When Evelyn visited, the house was spotless. Amina was dressed properly. There was even a cooked meal on the table, as if they were some picture-perfect family. "She is fine, Evelyn," Greg said one afternoon when Evelyn commented on how thin Amina looked. "You are overreacting." But Evelyn was not convinced. She started visiting more often, and each time, she noticed more. Amina's silence, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she flinched at sudden movements. She tried to talk to Amina in private, but the girl never said a word. Greg had made it clear what would happen if she did. Late one night, Amina stood outside Greg's bedroom door, her stomach twisting with hunger. "Please," she whispered. "I am hungry." No response. She pressed her forehead against the door, waiting. But it never opened. That night, she curled up on the floor, clutching her empty stomach. And for the first time, she wondered if she would ever feel full again. Amina sat in the dim light of her room, her knees drawn to her chest, listening to the silence press in around her. Hunger clawed at her stomach, but she had learned to ignore it, just like she ignored the sharp words and the cruel stares Greg threw her way. Fear had settled into her bones long ago, wrapping around her like an iron chain. But tonight, it felt heavier. Greg's voice carried up from the living room below, low and edged with something dangerous. Amina crept to the top of the stairs, her bare feet silent against the worn wood. She leaned forward just enough to see him pacing, his fingers gripping his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "She's too quiet," Greg muttered. "It's making people suspicious." Amina's breath hitched. He was talking about her. "Evelyn won't let this go," he continued, his voice sharp. "She's already sniffing around." A second voice crackled through the phone, one Amina did not recognize. What if she pushes harder? What if she brings in social services? Greg stopped pacing. His fist slammed down on the table. "She won't." His voice was cold, absolute. "I'll handle it. I always handle it." The confidence in his tone sent a chill down Amina's spine. The voice on the phone hesitated. "You're sure the insurance is solid?" Greg exhaled, irritated. "Positive. I checked again yesterday. Once it clears, she's out of my hair for good." Amina's stomach dropped. The words were like a slap, each one confirming what she had feared since overhearing his first hush phone call. Greg did not just hate her mother. He had done something to her. Memories flooded back. Things she had ignored, things that had not made sense at the time. The way Greg had avoided answering questions about the accident, the rushed funeral, the whispers on the phone late at night. She pieced it together like a puzzle, the final piece clicking into place with sickening clarity. Greg had sabotaged her mother's car. Amina stumbled back from the stairs, her breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her mouth, trying to keep from screaming. She wanted to run, to tell someone, to make him pay. But Greg's voice echoed in her mind. No one's coming for you. Tears burned in her eyes, but she swallowed them down. She would not cry. Not this time. The next morning, Amina moved carefully, avoiding Greg's gaze as she dressed and grabbed her school bag. Her body felt like lead, exhaustion dragging at her limbs, but she kept moving. Greg barely looked up as she stepped outside. For the first time in weeks, she felt relief just to be away from that house. At school, her heart nearly stopped when she spotted Evelyn waiting near the gate, her face lined with worry. Amina's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run to her, to bury her face in her grandmother's coat and finally let the tears fall. But she could not yet. Instead, she walked toward her, slow and careful, her heart pounding. Evelyn knelt to meet her eyes. "You okay, baby?" Amina hesitated. Then, in the smallest voice, she whispered, "No." Evelyn's face hardened. She reached for Amina's hand, holding it tight as she led her to a bench near the parking lot. Her voice was low but steady. "Tell me everything." The words spilled out in broken, jagged pieces. The hunger, the bruises, the cruel words, the threats, and finally, the phone calls. When she finished, Evelyn's hands were trembling. "He killed her," Amina whispered. "He made her car break. He said so." Evelyn pulled her close, wrapping her arms around her, holding her as if she could shield her from every bad thing in the world. "You're safe now," she murmured, a fierce promise. But Amina was not sure if she believed her. The fight for custody started almost immediately. Evelyn hired a lawyer and filed an emergency petition. Greg fought back hard. He spun his lies like silk, painting Evelyn as an overbearing old woman who could not let go. "She's too old to care for a child," his lawyer argued smoothly. "She's living on a fixed income. She can't provide for Amina the way I can." But Evelyn's lawyer fought back harder. They brought evidence, medical records, reports of neglect. They exposed every crack in Greg's carefully constructed facade. And then there was Amina. She sat in that courtroom, small but unshaken. She spoke the truth, her voice steady, her words cutting like a blade. And for the first time, Greg had no defense. The judge ruled in Evelyn's favor. Greg was taken away, his face twisted in fury as the officers led him out of the courtroom. Amina did not look back. She had spent too long living in fear. Now, she had a chance to start again, a chance to heal, a chance to be free. And this time, no one could take that away from her. Amina sat in the courtroom, her small hands trembling in Evelyn's firm grip. Her heart pounded against her ribs, each beat echoing in her ears. Across the room, Greg sat in his suit, wearing a carefully practiced smile. But his eyes, they were cold, calculating. The lawyers argued back and forth. But Amina knew words alone were not enough. She had lived in fear for too long. She had endured the bruises, the hunger, the cruel whispers in the dark. And now, she had the truth. She stood up, her voice shaky but unbreakable. "He does not love me," she said, her words cutting through the silence like a knife. "He does not even like me. He hurt me. He hurt my mom. And her breath hitched, but she forced herself to go on. "He killed her." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Greg's face twisted in rage. "She is lying," he bellowed, jumping to his feet. But Amina did not flinch. "I heard him," she continued, voice steady now. "He made her car break. He said so." The judge's gavel struck. "We will investigate this claim immediately." Greg's confidence cracked. Officers stepped forward. His protests turned into desperate shouts as they led him away in handcuffs. His threats echoed in Amina's ears. But for the first time, she was not afraid. Hashtag the fight for freedom. Amina clung to Evelyn as they left the courthouse, stepping into the crisp afternoon air. The judge had granted her grandmother temporary custody while Greg's crimes were investigated. It was not over, but it was enough. "We are going home, baby," Evelyn whispered. Home. Amina almost did not remember what that word meant. The car ride was silent. Amina watched the world blur past. Children laughing, dogs tugging at their leashes, life continuing as if nothing had happened. But for her, everything had changed. When they reached Evelyn's house, Amina hesitated at the door. It was nothing like Greg's cold, sterile home. Here, the walls were warm, covered in family photos and handmade quilts. The scent of lavender drifted through the air, but crossing that threshold felt like stepping into another world. Evelyn must have sensed her hesitation. She knelt beside Amina and cupped her face. "You are safe now." A promise. Amina wanted to believe her. Hashtag the road to healing. The days that followed were quiet but heavy. Evelyn repainted a small bedroom in soft lavender, draped fairy lights around the window, and filled the shelves with stuffed animals, books, and art supplies. Things that reminded Amina of a time before fear. But safety did not erase the past. The nightmares did not stop. Shadows still felt like threats. Loud voices made her flinch. One night, Evelyn found her curled up in bed, shaking. She sat beside her, stroking her hair. "It will take time," she murmured. "But you are not alone anymore." School was not much easier. Some kids whispered behind her back. Others asked too many questions about the court case, about Greg, about why she lived with her grandmother. Amina shrank into silence, but Evelyn would not let her disappear. "We are going to fix this," she said one afternoon, wiping Amina's tears. She enrolled Amina in therapy, where the girl slowly began unraveling the tangled mess of fear, guilt, and grief inside her. She was encouraged to draw, to write letters to her mother. Letters she could never send, but that made her feel close to her again. Evelyn also took her to an art class at the community center. At first, Amina kept to herself, sketching in the corner while other kids painted bold, carefree strokes. But little by little, color returned to her world. "She has talent," the art teacher told Evelyn one day. Amina was not sure if she believed that, but one afternoon, she painted her mother, smiling, radiant, strong. She showed it to Evelyn, who framed it and hung it in the living room. "She would be so proud of you," Evelyn whispered. And for the first time, Amina believed it. Hashtag the final justice. Even as her world began to heal, the weight of Greg's trial loomed over them. The police found evidence that he had tampered with her mother's car. He was charged with manslaughter and fraud. Evelyn tried to shield Amina from the details, but she overheard whispers of the case. She heard words like life sentence, and instead of fear, she felt something else, relief. One evening, Evelyn found her outside, staring up at the sky. "What are you thinking about, baby?" Amina hesitated, then smiled softly. "I think I can finally breathe." Evelyn wrapped her in a tight hug, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Amina let herself believe. She was free, she was safe, and she was finally home. Amina sat in the courtroom, her small hands clenched tightly in her lap. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made it hard to breathe. The final verdict was moments away. She did not have to be here. Evelyn had told her that. "You do not have to go through this again, baby," she had said gently that morning. But Amina needed to be here. She needed to hear it, to see it, to know that this part of her nightmare was truly coming to an end. The judge's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Guilty on all counts. A heavy weight lifted from Amina's chest, but she did not move. Greg stood motionless, his face unreadable, but she could feel the anger radiating from him. Still, he did not look at her. Not once. But Amina looked at him. She did not flinch. She did not shrink. For the first time, she was not the scared little girl hiding in the shadows of his cruelty. She was something stronger. As the guards took him away, his chains rattling against the cold courtroom floor, Evelyn wrapped her arms around Amina, holding her close. "It is over," she whispered. Amina exhaled, but she knew the truth. It was not over, not really. The bruises had faded, but the scars Greg left behind would take longer to heal. Still, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had control, like she could decide what happened next. Hashtag finding home again. The weeks that followed were quiet, peaceful in a way Amina had almost forgotten was possible. She and Evelyn found comfort in the little things. Planting flowers in the garden, repainting the front porch, baking cookies on lazy Sunday afternoons. Amina started making friends at school. Not the kind who whispered about her past. Not the ones who asked uncomfortable questions. These kids liked her for who she was. They laughed at her jokes, sat with her at lunch, and pulled her into group projects without hesitation. For the first time in a long time, she did not feel like an outsider. She joined the art club. At first, she kept to herself, quietly sketching in her notebook. But as the days passed, her strokes became bolder, her colors brighter. Then, she did something she never thought she would do. She entered a painting into a local competition. When they announced her name for second place, she almost did not believe it. But when she turned to Evelyn and saw the tears shining in her grandmother's eyes, reality hit her all at once. "You are amazing," Evelyn said, squeezing her tight. Amina smiled, and for the first time, she believed it too. Hashtag, a mother's love never fades. No matter how much time passed, Amina still thought about her mother every single day. She kept a framed painting of her in her bedroom, whispering goodnight to it before bed. Sometimes, the memories were painful, a cruel reminder of all she had lost. But other times, they felt like a lifeline, a connection that time, distance, and even death could not break. On the anniversary of Layla's death, Evelyn took her to the park, the same one they used to go to as a family. They sat under the big oak tree, the one that had been their favorite spot. They laid flowers at its base, petals soft against the earth. "She would want you to be happy," Evelyn murmured. Amina tilted her face to the sky, the sunlight peeking through the branches, warming her skin. And for the first time, she believed it was possible. Her past had not disappeared. The pain had not vanished. But she was not alone anymore, and that made all the difference.